Chapter 16.
Oh no.
Rebecca felt a welling rush of sadness inside as she stared after Steve, John and David both grim and silent beside her. The blank shock on Steve's face before he turned away told them what must have happened.
Poor Karen. And Steve. What it must have been like.
They'd found the lab too late. She glanced down at the key card slot next to the door as she stepped into the double seal, feeling a horrible sense of futility at the pointlessness of it all. They'd come to find information, only to find tests, only for Karen to get infected, and then to turn against Steve even as they'd reached the one chance they might have had to cure her.
But Kinnison. Thurman.
She stepped through the second door, frowning. The laboratory was huge, counters lined with equipment, desks piled incredibly high with stacks of paper. But it was the open hatch across from them that first commanded her attention, her gaze immediately drawn to the thick sheet of plexi or reinforced glass set into the thick door. It was an airlock, the inner door standing open, and behind the second sealed door, past the mesh gate, the dark waters of the ocean swirled past, bubbles spinning by. The laboratory was underwater. The second thing she noticed was the blood, a thick trail of crimson leading across the concrete floor in splatters and pools, but ending in a sliding smear. Steve must have moved a body.
So much! God, not Karen's.
Steve had walked to the airlock and turned, seemed to be waiting for them to cross the room. Rebecca started towards him, her throat tight with sympathy and swelling tears. John and David were right behind her, quiet, looking around the vast room, when behind them, the door back into the passage slammed shut. They spun around, saw Kinnison standing there, holding a tiny semi-automatic, a .25, pointing it at them with no expression on his face. "Drop your weapons." The low, quiet voice was Steve's. Rebecca turned again, confused. I saw Steve pointing his Beretta at them, his face as blank as Kinnison's. Now that she was close enough to the airlock, she saw the body on the grated floor. It was Karen, her white face streaked with blood, a gaping blackness where her left eye had been.
Oh my God. What's going on?
David stepped towards him, holding his Beretta loosely, confusion and disbelief in his voice. "Steve, what are you doing? What's happened?" "Drop your weapons." His voice had no emotion at all. "What did you do to him?" John screamed, turned and fired at Kinnison, the round punching neatly through his left temple. Kinnison crumpled, sagging. The second shot came from Steve's Beretta, hitting John in the lower back. Blood gushed from the hole as he staggered halfway around. Rebecca saw the dark fluid trickling from his mouth, the dazed disbelief in his eyes, and John crashed to the cement, spasming once before he lay motionless. It all happened in the span of a few seconds. "Drop your weapons." He pointed his semi at Rebecca. For a moment, Rebecca could do nothing at all. She stared at Steve in horror, felt tears slipping down her frozen cheeks, unable to comprehend what had happened. "Disarm." He let his Beretta slip from his fingers and clattered to the floor. Rebecca dropped the Beretta, the heavy weapon falling from her equally heavy fingers. "Back up." He was still aiming at her chest. "Do as he says." They stepped back slowly, Rebecca unable to take her eyes from Steve's face, the handsome, boyish face she'd grown to care about. Now it was only a mask, worn by a
zombie.
They backed into a desk and stopped, watching dully as Steve moved to pick up their weapons. Rebecca's mind whirling with more than just horror and loss. A zombie that could walk and talk like a man. Like Kinnison. Like Steve.
How? When did this happen?
As Steve stepped away, a pleasant male voice came from out of the corner of the room from behind a desk. "All finished then? My God, what a Greek tragedy." The voice was followed by an appearance. A slender, gray-haired man stood and walked around the desk, moving almost casually to stand by Steve. He was in his mid-50s, his hair long enough to brush at the collar of his lab coat, his lined face sporting a beaming smile. "I'll repeat my instructions for the benefit of our guests."
If either of them make any sudden moves, shoot them.
Rebecca knew who he was immediately. Knew that she hadn't been wrong after all.
Dr. Griffith.
Griffith arched an eyebrow, seeming amused.
My reputation precedes me. How did you know?
I've heard about you. Or Nicholas Dunn, anyway.
His smile froze, then widened again.
All in the past.
He waved one hand in the air.
And now you'll never have a chance to tell anyone about the pleasure of our acquaintance, I'm afraid.
Griffith's smile faded, his dark blue gaze turning icy.
You people have held me up long enough. I'm tired of this game. So I believe that I'm going to have your nice young man kill you.
He brightened suddenly, and Rebecca saw the madness flashing in those eyes. A complete break from sanity.
Now that I think of it, why create even more of a mess? Steve, tell our friends to get into the airlock, if you would be so kind.
Steve kept his weapon trained on her heart.
Get into the airlock.
Before David could take a step, Rebecca started talking, fast and deadly serious.
What is the T-virus? Did you use that as a platform for whatever this is? I know you were responsible for the increase in amplification time, but this is something new. This is something that Umbrella doesn't even know about. It's a mutagen with an instantaneous membrane fusion, isn't it?
Griffith's eyes widened.
Steve, wait. What do you know about membrane fusion, little girl?
I know that you perfected it. I know that you've managed to create a rapid fuse virion that apparently infects brain tissue in under an hour.
In under 10 minutes.
His whole demeanor had changed from that of a smiling old man to that of a fanatic, his gaze narrowing with a dangerous, brilliant intensity, his lips drawing tight over clenched teeth.
These stupid animals with the ridiculous T-virus. Birkin may have a mind, but the rest of them are fools, playing with war games while I've created a miracle.
He turned, gesturing at a row of shining oxygen tanks next to the lab's entrance.
Do you know what that is? Do you know what I've managed to synthesize? Peace! Peace and the freedom from choice for all of mankind!
David felt his heart start to pound viciously, his entire body breaking out in a cold sweat. Griffith was pacing in front of them now, his eyes burning with mad genius.
There's enough of my strain, my creation in those tanks, to infect 1 billion people in less than 24 hours. I've managed to find the answer to the pitiful, selfish, and self-important breed that the human race has become. When I give my gift to the wind, the world will become free again. It will be reborn, a simple and beautiful place for every creature, great and small, surviving on instinct alone. You're insane.
He knew that Griffith could kill them, was going to kill them, but unable to stop himself from saying it.
You're out of your bloody mind. This is why my team is dead, but all those people are dead. He wants to turn the world into things like Kinnison, like Steve.
Griffith snarled at them, flecks of spittle flying from his lips.
And you're dead. You're not going to be here when my miracle creates the earth. I deprive you of my gift, both of you. When the sun comes up tomorrow, there will be peace, and neither of you will ever know a second of it.
He whirled around, pointing at Steve.
Put them in the airlock, now!
Steve raised the Beretta again, motioning towards the open hatch, where Karen's lifeless body lay slumped and bloody on the floor.
He's out of reach. Gotta grab the weapon in time. Steve, now! Kill them if they won't go.
David and Rebecca stepped into the lock, David's body cold, tensed. He had to do something, or the world would be infected by this maniac's psychotic dream. Steve slammed the lock closed. They were trapped. Chapter 17. Griffith was furious, shaking with an anger as the airlock door slammed closed. Didn't they see? Didn't they understand anything but their own petty, stupid lives? He stared at the young Steve, the rage spilling out, threatening to drive him insane, to make him vomit,
To kill. Put that gun in your ugly face and pull the trigger. Die. Die. Just die!
Steve raised the weapon. Rebecca screamed, beating her fists helplessly against the thick metal door.
No, 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 no!
The thunder of the shot cut her screams off. Steve fell against the base of the hatch, mercifully out of sight.
Already dead. She was already dead. It wasn't Steve anymore.
Jesus. Rebecca looked up, looked straight into Griffith's wildly petulant gaze through the window, and Griffith smiled suddenly, a beaming, triumphant grin of accomplishment and malicious spite. The raging loss and terror she felt were transformed by the sight of that smile. Rebecca stared into those raving blue eyes and realized she'd never truly felt hate before.
Oh, you miserable bastard!
He told them of his plan, but at that second, the thought was too big for her to fathom, too vast and insane a tragedy for her to fit her mind around. All she could think of was that he'd killed Karen and John. He'd killed Steve. And she wanted nothing more than to destroy him, to see him lose, to see him suffer and feel pain, and
if we don't do something, his madness will be fully realized, and we have to stop it, to stop him from dancing on the grave of the world.
Griffith moved to a control panel next to the door and started to press buttons, still smiling. There was a heavy clanking from the grated floor, and water started to gurgle in, drawn from the icy black waters of the cove that pressed against the outer hatch. The airlock was just big enough for her and David to not have to stand on Karen's bloody, twisted body, and already the water was turning red, foaming up from an unseen vent and lapping at their feet, covering Karen's white fingers.
A minute, maybe less.
In the lab, Griffith was leaning against a desk across from them, arms folded smugly, watching. Behind him, a backdrop of death. Kennison, John, and the gleaming steel cylinders filled with Griffith's evil genius.
We have to do something!
Rebecca turned desperately to David, praying that he had some brilliant plan, and saw only resignation and sorrow in his eyes as he stared down at Karen's corpse, his shoulders slumped with defeat.
David!
He looked up at her bleakly, hopelessly.
I'm sorry. All my fault.
Karen's hands were already floating, tendrils of short blonde hair haloing around her pitiful face. Rebecca grabbed at the latch of the door uselessly, felt its unmoving strength, healed by Griffith's controls. Cold water seeped through the canvas of her shoes, over her ankles, the rising smells of salt and darkness and blood frightening her as badly as David's hopelessly whispered drone.
I hadn't been so selfish. Rebecca, I'm so sorry. You have to believe that I never meant.
Terrified, on the edge of hysteria, she grabbed his shoulders, roughly shouting.
Okay, fine. You're an asshole, but if Griffith releases the virus, millions of people are gonna die.
For a second, she didn't think he'd heard her. She felt the water rising, inching up her calves, her heart pounding wildly. And then his dark eyes sharpened, losing their glassy sheen. He looked quickly around the tight compartment, and she could see his mind working, see the sharp gaze taking in all of the details. Steel, watertight hatches, a mesh enclosure over the outer door, like a thin shark cage, 2 feet deep, cold water bubbling over the knees now, Karen's arms and head lifting, floating.
Doors of steel, the windows 2 inches of plexi. Once the outer hatch pops, there's the cage.
He looked into her eyes, his own filled with frustrated anger, with shock and apology, and shook his head. She dropped her hands, her body starting to shiver from the cold, her thoughts delving into black despair. David sloshed closer and put his arms around her.
Just your luck to meet me.
He rubbed her upper arms as her teeth started to chatter, as the water swirled around her hips. Karen's lifeless hand brushed her leg.
Look. Karen!
Rebecca's heart seemed to stop at mid-beat. David held her tightly, wishing a million things, knowing that it was too late for any of them. He glanced into the lab and saw that Griffith was still watching them, still smiling. He looked away, filled with a useless, dismal hatred as the icy water slopped against his hips.
Murdering bloody bastard.
Rebecca tensed against his chest suddenly. She pushed away from him and grabbed at Karen's body. her fingers searching frantically through the dead woman's vest. She laughed, a bright, hysterical snap of joy.
She's gone mad,
and jerked a dark, round object from one of Karen's pockets. David saw what it was and felt pure amazement sweep through him.
She carried it for luck. It's live.
David took the grenade and held it behind his back, thoughts racing again, accessing the water to his waist and almost to Rebecca's heaving chest.
Out of the pulse. Pull the pin and get in the cage. Hold the hatch closed.
They'd probably still die, but if they could pull it off, they wouldn't go out alone. Griffith watched the water rise, watched the two run through a stereotypical melodrama almost absently. His thoughts had already turned to the coming dawn and the problem of getting the heavy canisters upstairs. He supposed it served him right, losing his temper that way. The pair were putting on quite a show. The girl, angry at the Brit's apathy, a quick, desperate look for a way out of their predicament. The final embrace, then the panic. The girl clutching at the T-virus drone, the Brit talking at her, frowning, worried for her sanity even as the dark water rose over her young bosom.
Sad, so sad. They should never have come. Never have tried to get at me.
Now the man was holding her up, pathetically working to postpone the inevitable as the water spun up across the glass. Once they were dead, he'd pop the cage, give the Leviathans a treat before setting them free again, free to swim in unmanned seas and live out their days in peace.
Ocean and land is one. Mirrors of simplicity. Instinct.
The drone body fluttered lazily past the window, and he saw that the two invaders had propped themselves between the hatches, struggling to hold on for the last bit of air. A determined pair, if thick-headed. It occurred to him suddenly that he'd never bothered to find out who they were, who had sent them.
And it doesn't matter now, does it?
The lock had filled. The light on the control panel indicated that the outer door had unlatched. It was over, except they were scrambling to get out, kicking through into the cage, and something small dropped past the window as they pushed the door closed behind them. Griffith frowned and... he just had time to register disbelief before the hatch slammed into his body and the screaming torrent of liquid ice took his breath away. Chapter 18. When the grenade exploded, everything happened too fast for Rebecca to think about. There were only sensations, terror reigning over all. Brilliant light and explosive movement as the door blew outward, hardness against her back that gave way in an instant, lungs screaming, a billion bubbles like bullets, and incredible, impossible pressure that seemed to go on in shades of cold and black. Faster than fast, movement and muffled, strange sound. Dark shapes moved over her feeling mind, blotting out everything in growing flickers of dizziness, and her chest was imploding, her lungs eating themselves. She kicked and kicked and kicked, and as her legs started to weaken, the dark flicker swallowing her up, air, sweet, wonderful air slapped across her dying face. She drank convulsively, gasping in great, heaving gulps of the stuff, still not thinking at all. Her body thought instead, greedily swallowing life, the spray and sting of salt, the warmer, rocking waves, a high, reedy buzz. A massive wave of pressure pushed her forward, driving water up her nose as buckets of it suddenly rained down on top of her. Rebecca gasped air, spinning, her mind connected to her body again.
Damn it! What?
Rebecca!
A choked cry from somewhere in the buzzing dark. The buzz was clearer now. It was... another surging wave. Another torrent pouring over her, seeking to drown her as Griffith had been unable to do. And as the rain fell away, she saw light, thick beams of it piercing the dark, wild surface of the cove. A boat. An engine's powerful, deepening thrum as it sped towards her over the thrashing area.
Rebecca!
David's desperate call from her left.
I'm here!
She could see the explosion this time. See the giant column of water silhouetted against the searching beams of light before the debris-crusted wave knocked her back, blinding her with a vicious slap of foam. She managed to take a quick gulp of air before the column came down, crashing over her, spattering loudly against the chalky surface.
Depth charges. They're firing depth charges. Umbrella?
The boat was less than 30 meters away when the engine suddenly cut out, the lights playing across the water in front of her. There was a splashing movement nearby, and the lights moved, one of the blindingly bright beams finding David's exhausted, dripping face a short distance away. A man's voice, coming from the boat now moving slowly towards them. "This is Captain Blake of the Philadelphia S.T.A.R.S. Identify yourself."
S.T.A.R.S!
Blake went on, his shout louder as the boat came closer. "The water's not safe. We're coming to get you out." David called back, his voice clogged and cracking.
Drop! David, drop! Exodus! And Rebeca Chambers!
When Blake shouted again, he said the most wonderful, most beautiful words that Rebecca had ever heard. "Burton sent us to find you. Hang on!"
Barry! Oh, thank God, Barry!
As drained as she was, as spiritually wasted, torn by loss and fear from the long, terrible night, Rebecca had just enough strength to smile. That's when she heard the choking groan behind her. There was darkness, tinged with red and an echo of pain. In that darkness, there was no self and no peace. He was alone and engaged in battle, a furious struggle to find the end to that absence of light. He knew that finding the end quickly was important, but a maze of strange and somehow frightening images blocked his way, insisting that he didn't need to hurry. A ghost, a soldier, a rage. The ringing laugh of a woman he had known who was no more, and the terrible dead eyes that had taken away the light in an explosion of fire and sound. Eyes that he knew, but was afraid to remember. The maze beckoned him, called him to explore deeper and give up his search for the end of darkness. But the path would only lead to greater pain, and he'd almost decided to stop fighting, to let the shadows take over when the light found him in an explosive blast of deafening thunder. Then he was being shot through ice and liquid black, pounded to consciousness by pain. And it was the pain that he focused on in that screaming, terrible ride, the pain that drove him to fight the darkness. His awareness spun away as the air curdled in his lungs and the raging cold numbed the pain. But then he could breathe, and the jagged piece of bobbing wood beneath his clawed fingers told him that there was, in fact, light. He wasn't dead, although he almost wished he were. He could still hardly breathe, and the pain in his back was exquisite. And then he heard the sound of David's voice amidst the sloshing cold, and felt that life might be worth living after all. He tried to call out, but all that emerged was an exhausted moan. There was a stab of sharp and blinding light, and then darkness again. But there was a flicker of awareness this time that allowed him to understand what was happening. Pain and movement, a feeling of weightless suspension, and then hardness against his cheek. Chill and more movement, the sound of cloth ripping and paper tearing. Excited voices calling orders, and again the shriek of torn flesh. When he came around again, he saw a shadow in a S.T.A.R.S vest bending over him, with an IV bag in one hand and a needle in the other.
"Oh, that's morphine."
He tried to say it, but again he only groaned. A split second later, he saw two pale blurs hovering over him as the S.T.A.R.S shadow continued to work over him with warm and gentle hands. The blurs were David and Rebecca, eyes circled with dark, hair dripping, faces tired and lost.
"You're going to be okay, John. Just rest now. It's all over."
A spreading warmth started to flush through his body, a delicious, sleepy warmth that banished the roar of pain to a distant and faraway land. Just as a friendly darkness came to claim him, he looked into David's eyes and managed to rasp out what he suddenly wanted to say more than anything. It took great effort, but it had to be said.
"You two look like something a coyote ate and shit off a cliff. Seriously."
John was followed into the healing blackness by the sweet sound of laughter. The middle-aged S.T.A.R.S medic had taken John inside the small cabin on the 30-foot boat, coming out only once to tell them that everything looked alright. 2 broken ribs, some deep tissue trauma, and a punctured lung, they managed to patch him up well enough to call him stable, and he was resting comfortably. A medevac helicopter had already been radioed for and would be arriving soon. and the medic seemed confident that John would manage a full recovery. David had wept a little at the news, and not been a bit ashamed. They sat in the back of the boat, huddled under a scratchy wool blanket as Blake and his team continued to set charges, powering easily back and forth across the cove. The Pennsylvania team had already brought up 4 of the giant creatures before they'd seen the explosive burst of air and debris that had come from the lab, and it was starting to look as though there weren't any more. David had one arm around Rebecca, girl leaning against his chest as the black sky gradually started to shade a deep, ethereal blue. Neither of them spoke, too tired to do more than watch the team work, dropping charges and searching the results, back and forth and back again. Blake had promised to send divers down for Griffith's tanks as soon as the cove was clear and John had been picked up. There were 2 wetsuits already laid out on the bow's deck, a young alpha whose name David had forgotten, preparing them with a studied intensity. He reminded David of Steve a little bit. Somehow, the thought of Steve didn't bring the kind of pain that David had expected it would. It hurt. It hurt like hell. Karen and Steve, gone. But when he thought of what they had managed to stop, what they had been a part of, it wasn't all for nothing. We stopped Griffith's insanity. Stopped them from effectively killing millions of innocent people. God, they would have been so proud. The pain was bad, but the guilt wasn't as devastating as he feared it would be. His responsibility in their deaths was something he knew he'd have to ponder for a long time to come. But he thought that there was a good chance that he'd be able to find a way to come to terms with it eventually. He wasn't sure how, but the tears he'd been able to shed over John had struck him as a step in the right direction. David's tired thoughts turned to Umbrella, to what role they played in Griffith's madness. While they surely hadn't meant for their researcher to go mad, they had created the circumstances that allowed it to happen. Their complete disregard for human life could only have been encouragement for someone like Griffith. And without Umbrella, the scientists would never have had access to the T-virus.
Someday soon they'll be held accountable for what they've done. Not today or tomorrow, but soon.
Perhaps Trent would help them again. Perhaps Barry and Jill and Chris would uncover more in Raccoon. Perhaps. Rebecca curled closer against him, breath warm and even against his drying clothes. David let the thought go for the time being, content to simply sit and not think at all. He was very, very tired. As the first rays of the sun slipped over the horizon, Blake pronounced the waters clean, though neither David nor Rebecca heard him. Both had fallen into a deep and dreamless sleep beneath the twilight of the coming day. Epilogue. The meeting room was a study in quiet but unpretentious elegance. 3 men sat at the stately oak table, a 4th standing by the window and staring out thoughtfully at the hazy morning sky. The man at the window could see the others reflected in the glass, though he doubted that they noticed his careful scrutiny, for as sharp as they were politically, they tended to be fairly dull about watching what went on around them. After the phone conference, the man who always wore blue spoke first, directly addressing the elderly man with the groomed mustache. "Do we need to discuss the ramifications of this?" Mustache sighed.
I believe the report covered them.
The tea drinker broke in, setting his cup down with a rattle. Steaming liquid slopped over the sides, distorting the tiny umbrella design that adorned the side.
I don't think it's a wise idea to underestimate the magnitude of this difficulty. Particularly not with the current instability factor in development.
Blue nodded.
I agree. Things like this have a way of getting out of hand. First the secondary in Raccoon, now the Cove.
Mustache cut him off with a sharp glance. Blue, properly abashed, cleared his throat, his face as red as he struggled to recover.
That is to say, I believe there should be a more thorough investigation into these matters. Don't you think so, Mr. Trent?
The man at the window turned around, wondering how these people had ever managed to get where they were. He didn't smile, knowing how much it bothered them when he didn't smile. "I'm afraid I'll have to get back to you on that." Blue nodded quickly.
Of course, take all the time you need. No hurry, gentlemen, am I right?
Without another word, Trent turned and walked out of the room, outwardly as intimidating and precise as they expected him to be, as they wanted him to be. Inside, he wondered how much longer the game would go on. Resident Evil, Book 2, Caliban Cove. Written by S.D. Perry, narrated and voice acted by Kenny Rutter. All sounds pulled from YouTube. Featured music in order of appearance. Legend of the Bionicle by Nathan First from Bionicle Mask of Light. Kagome's theme by Kaoru Wada from Inuyasha. Tea with the Pansophical by Critical Role and Sterling Maffey from Critical Role Welcome to Taldore. Halo, Never Forget / Peril by the London Philharmonic Orchestra from Greatest Video Game Music. The Man with the Machine Gun by Nobuo Uematsu from Final Fantasy VIII. Kuja's theme by Nobuo Uematsu from Final Fantasy IX. Destruction of Onukoro by Nathan First from Bionicle Mask of Light. Heavy Price Paid by Martin O'Donnell from Halo 2. Our New Coalyfield by Nathan First from Bionicle Mask of Light. Mimir by Bear McCreary from God of War 2018. Deathwalker's Ward by Critical Role and Sterling Maffey from Critical Role Welcome to Taldore. Entering the Nest by Alexander Desplat from Godzilla. Helheim by Bear McCreary from God of War 2018. Vaki Attack by Nathan First from Bionicle 2 Legends of Metro Nui. Back to Janjira by Alexander Desplat from Godzilla. Exploring the Isle by Gerard K. Marino from God of War 2. Healing Tahu by Nathan First from Bionicle Mask of Light. Anxiety by Nobuo Uematsu from Final Fantasy VII. The Caverns of Kristallfin by Critical Role and Robert Wolf from Critical Role Welcome to Taldore. Pandora's Song by Chris Velasco from God of War 3. Coley Tournament by Nathan First from Bionicle Mask of Light. Lacan's Death by Nathan First from Bionicle 2 Legends of Metro Nui. Golden Gate Chaos by Alexander Desplat from Godzilla. All for Nothing by Chris Velasco from God of War 3. Back to the Osha by Alexander Desplat from Godzilla. Turk's Theme by Nobuo Uematsu from Final Fantasy VII. And The Other Promise by Patron from Remembrance of Kingdom Hearts. Resident Evil Caliban Cove was published in 1998 by Pocket Books, a subsidiary of Simon & Schuster. Keep listening for a preview of the next chilling Resident Evil book, City of the Dead. Something moved. A shadow, soft and darting over the mashed remains some 20 feet in front of her, and at the same time, Claire heard a strange, rasping sound, breathing, and she looked up, still not sure what she was seeing or hearing. That ragged breathing and the tick of talons on wood, talons themselves, thick and curved, claws of a creature that couldn't exist. Big, the size of a full-grown man, but the resemblance ended there, and it was so impossible that she could only see it in pieces, her mind struggling to put them together. The inflamed, purplish flesh of the naked, long-limbed creature that clung to the ceiling. The puffed, gray-white tissue of the partially exposed brain. The scar-rimmed holes where the eyes should have been.
I've seen this.
The creature's rounded head dropped back, the wide jaw opening, a roped stream of dark drool pouring out and splattering over what was left of the cop. It extended its tongue, eely and pink, the rough surface shimmering wetly as it slithered out. And out. And out. The snaking tongue uncoiling and whipping from side to side, so long that it actually trailed through the ripped flesh of the cop. The creature opened its mouth again and screamed.